Welcome to this session of patterns of digital strategy using Wardley Maps. I'm Philippe. You probably have known me for a while organizing this meetup, which was Digital Leadership before. And now we renamed it to the Lean Tech Circles, working closely with Fabrice Bernard, whom we did some meetups last year with. And in line with the Lean Tech Manifesto book. So that's kind of a side thing around digital strategy. It's a series I'm going to run all year, and I'll explain more about that. And I invite you to attend the others. And if I may, let's get it. There are other things and some announcements before we crack on. There are other things going on in the meetup. Given that we are aligned to Lean Tech and the ideas of Lean in the world of services and tech, we are also running other things. We have Lean Tech Gamba. So the idea of Gamba is the Lean idea of Gamba. We invite people to bring experience, and if you have such experience as clients willing to share experience, I welcome you to make contact so we can talk about those and present those. And we have a first one with our Toyota Does Leadership and what services and tech can learn. This is very much, Toyota has been very much a company that has led the way in thinking around how do we get people to do knowledge work, even in the context of production manufacturing. So that should be very interesting. I met Monica with Fortune at Toyota. She's ex-Toyota. And Toyota has very interesting things to say around leadership. And as the industry is struggling a bit around what do we do with Scrum Masters, for instance, how do we have the agile roles and what's the leadership of the agile role? I thought it's going to be a really interesting topic. So I invite you, it's a free meetup. I invite you to join. We have another one around organizing for value to flow in services and tech. And that's an exercise I've got. It's a mini training. There's a small cost involved with that. At the moment, we don't have enough for a class size, so I really invite you to spread the word. If we can, we have about a month to build up a class size for it. So please join it. It's an interesting exercise that I learned at Porsche, and I made a Miro version of it. So we run that virtually. It's very engaging, very experiential, and you learn about flow that way. And we relate that to the context of flow in services and tech. And I shall do it with Antoine, which also has a physical version, with paper origami type things. And we may run a physical one at some point. They do that in France quite regularly. And there will be, before that, there will be the second of this series, which is about convenience being very closely linked with the disintermediation. So this will expand on this topic next time. We also plan to do some things. I'm talking to some people around running things around strategy deployment, which is more linked with the X matrix, the OKRs, how we distribute that, how we cascade them, and so on. So you should see some of those things coming up as well. So without further ado, this series is going to explore patterns of digital strategy, as in strategy in tech, strategy in the knowledge age, strategy in complexity. And fundamentally, strategy is not really changing in a way. And I had a panel discussion recently about what's changing. And we started saying nothing is really changing. Strategy is still about anticipation, is still about clarity of landscape, and so on. But what's changing is the environment. And through that discussion, we discover actually a lot is changing. And what's changing is the environment, the emerging trends, the need for strategy to also adapt to the changing circumstances much quicker. With a competition that is global and left field entrance and so on, which makes strategy a lot more complex. And interestingly, most strategy tools are still coming from the 60s and the 80s, which is essentially pre-digital. And it means very often they are not so well adapted to doing strategy in the modern dynamics of business and the dynamics of business with technology. Um, and I'll get more into that later. So the patterns we're looking at, and those are patterns I experienced through my journey in digital. I've worked into digital probably about 30 years now. And we'll start with disintermediation. We're going to talk about convenience, very closely linked to disintermediation, but we'll explore the convenience element. And then we'll talk about adjacent moves, which we'll brush over also today. We'll talk about consolidating utilities, and all those things recoup. We'll talk about the intelligence advantage, and how you go from data to intelligence and then engaging customers, and now that becomes the advantage. We'll repeat some considerations. I've done plenty of talks on that, but that's a very hot topic right now in industry around how can we align discover value chains, align them and organize them using maps. In June, we'll look about ecosystem in July, and September will be more of a case applied to banking and the disruption. And I've done quite a few maps in banking, which are interesting. So I will bring them to light, and we'll have a discussion around how do we see disruption. The main topic being the challengers have not pushed away the incumbents so far, but is their time coming? And I haven't announced yet. I've got some ideas for October, November, December. But I'd like to open it to suggestions. So if you have some ideas about something you'd like to see addressed, some patterns you noticed yourself, I'd like that to be emergent, and I invite you to send those to me, and we'll look at what can we get into those later sessions in the year, and exploring some more interesting patterns. Otherwise, I've got some ideas, but I'd like that to be emergent. The format of the session, it's going to be a bit tutorial, which I'm not the biggest fan of. I'd like to have the sessions very interactive, but the format is probably more for that. And I think we'll set some fundamentals or master classes and cohorts to have more the experience of mapping and getting you to map and discussing in a group and getting those dynamics. How do you work with map? How do you collaborate with maps? Which is really what matters in business. But that needs more time. That needs those type of sessions. So the sessions today and the sessions through the series will be a bit more tutorially, and sessions where you will see mapping through practice, and we'll invite some discussion point, especially debrief at the end. I invite you to get into two minds as we're going through this session. One is how the pattern of disintermediation may affect the business you're working in. So what we're going to talk about, and the example today is very much around the quick service restoration industry, but it's also generalized for all perspectives. And I invite you to think about how is that applicable in my business. And equally, I invite you to think about the tools you may be using, the techniques you may be using today, and how Wardley Map give you an insight of the landscape. So think about, keep those two things in mind as you're going through the session, and the debrief will be about that. So let's dive in. What's what is disintermediation? And first of all, what is intermediation? Typically, you are a customer, and you go to a business and you get some goods, services, or whatever it is directly from that business. That's an intermediated relationship. And the businesses often think about their competitive landscape as which other businesses are doing the same services as us, and how are we going to compete for market share in that landscape. How do we get better? How do we have better features maybe for a service? How do we have a better good, a cheaper price, or whatever it is, to actually gain market share in the landscape where they're competitors or people that do a similar business? And then what tends to happen is we got a digital startup that arrives and that sets itself in the relationship between those customers and the business, or the businesses to that matter. And basically all it does, it handles the customers, and it harvests in the process the lion's share of the margins. And it's able to offer choices because it uses all the other businesses as a commodity. And typically, because it's the platform, it will drive the prices down. And by driving the prices down and taking some of the margin away, of course, it puts a big challenge to the businesses. Okay, so very simple diagram, but fundamentally that's what it's about. And I remember the CEO of Accor Hotel describing exactly that. So what's that aggregator model? It's people bringing the convenience to the customers, bringing a large choice and low prices, and actually all they do is about the customer intelligence and the engagement. Their profile is typically a startup spirit, even at scale. They are asset light. Their cost to operate is relatively low. Then they need to have assets. They're often a digital native, customer focused. Their business is about the customers. They have high leverage around customer insights, real-time marketing, and they have a low cost of sale as a result. So it's very difficult to compete with them because once they have that reach, they're very capable and they have a large reach, and suddenly they are the ones to intermediate the relationship. They bring convenience typically in an industry that did not imagine that convenience, and we'll talk about convenience next. Think about Amazon, for instance. Think about Deliveroo. And they master logistics to offer that convenience. And there's a risk, but they run a risk of squeezing so much the incumbent that actually what they run their business on could actually go out of business. And that's a big challenge. Now, if we look at it from the incumbent side, very usually they are a digital laggard in a sense that they have not mastered as a business how to integrate the tech dimension in their business and in their operating model. It's very often a bolted on thing. They have a poor digital experience and limited customer relationship or value add in that relationship. They see, and I've seen that firsthand, they see aggregators as an opportunity to get volumes of transactions. And sometimes they even think that the margin loss of that they need to pay to those aggregators, they can compensate with higher price, which is a poorer deal for the customers. And we have to recognize that actually this fits in a digital landscape the traditional marketing model of the 4 Ps and what many organizations still run on. It's sort of the digital version of a Procter and Gamble where they have a lot of products and they go through retail to actually sell that to the customers. They don't sell direct to the customers. But the promise of the internet, the promise of digital was to have that direct reach. And once you harness the intelligence of your customers, you can actually do a lot with that direct reach. So their model of working with retail kind of translate into a digital landscape of working through aggregators. And it fits their understanding of marketing. They see the value in a brand, not so much in the relationship, and they accept in a way to commoditize themselves in the process and relinquish margins. But it's very dangerous. And I've seen people, being in a situation where suddenly the aggregator says, I'd like 20% more, thank you very much. And then suddenly the economics are very difficult to adapt. So if we take an example, Toys R Us, for instance, and you may have seen Toys R Us a few years ago and wonder where are all those shops gone. It was created in 1957, and their big thing was being a supermarket for toys. They were the intermediation. They were the people, having that sort of white space where you had massive choice of toys. And they had a massive growth from the 60s to the 90s. Now, in 2005, they had a buyout from a PE, which actually lumbered them through some debt. They had the competition from the supermarkets, and they didn't really work out their e-commerce. And effectively in 2000, they outsourced, and actually earlier than 2005, but they outsourced their e-commerce to Amazon, which ended up with lawsuits and so on, because it was supposed to be exclusive. But all the competence of digital, they outsourced to Amazon. What was going to happen to them? And they are now bankrupt. And if you think, other examples, the insurance industry, where do you go and buy your insurance today? Do you phone your supplier, your current insurance? Do you renew automatically? Or do you look at the price and think, hang on a second, or they taking me for a ride here? And you go to a comparison website. Go compare the market and so on. The hotel industry, hotel.com, booking.com, Airbnb have challenged the hotel industry. Food industry, you go to Deliveroo, Just Eat, Uber Eats. Not necessarily to the main brand anymore. Retail industry, you go to Amazon, AliExpress and Temu are pushing really hard in the Western countries now. Entertainment industry, you go to Netflix, Prime, YouTube probably. And interestingly, a lot of the younger generations going to YouTube for entertainment. Not necessarily an organized channel. Taxi industry, Uber, automotive industry, and those are more emergent now. Automotive industry, it's interesting to see the changing landscape where actually the leasing companies might be the one taking over from the salesman because they're offering a way to finance your car. It's the service taking over. Banking industry, Bitcoin is going to be very interesting. Money supermarket and so on. It's completely still bubbling away and emergent in that space, but it's happening. So we see how most traditional industries are being challenged by digital players landing themselves in the relationship between the traditional incumbents and their customers to take over basically that relationship and part of the margins. And if you think about doing strategy in the landscape, most traditional strategy tools miss that. In the SWOT diagram, you have threats, but very rarely will you consider the threats outside of your competitive landscape. A BCG matrix you cannot transform your view in a portfolio of products, but you often miss that product service mix. Porter 5 Force, you have the threats of new entrants. It's very clearly a dimension you work with. But do you really look at the left field ones? Not so much. Pestol, it's very broad about the landscape. But really, where do you go look at those sort of disruptors stepping into your business relationship? And it's not really designed for that unless you really specifically address it under the tech risk. So those traditional tools, yes, you could argue they offer a dimension to look at it. But it's very rare that you go into the details of that dimension. So scenario planning will help you out, but scenario planning needs that clarity of landscape so you understand where you're going to scenario plan, what scenarios are going to play out in the landscape. And that's where it's useful to bring strategy tools that look at the landscape. The external business landscape and the internal value chain alignment to that. So here we're going to look at what do we mean, actually, one thing before that, I was talking about the 4 Ps and seeing how the landscape gets challenged. The 4 Ps in strategy are very much a marketing take that still, talks about strategy or still brings elements of strategy. And the 4 Ps are the product, the price, the place, and the promotions. But the product gets challenged. It's tech loaded. It's about content, ecosystem, software, services. It gets all very complicated. The price, you have bundling, you have aggregators, you have tailored pricing, personalized prices. Same for promotions. And the place, it used to be at a shop or somewhere, a supermarket, but now it's anywhere, and the doorstep convenience. So all the 4 Ps, traditional 4 Ps, are very much getting challenged. And I've got in bigger presentations, I look at and I build up to this typically, but look at conceiving basically the perspective of a product as the product generally has a service with it, as content with it, and as a platform to serve it. And the tech is connecting all this. And we need to start thinking about how do we build that ecosystem of all those things rather than just relying on temporary sort of placement of product, promotions we do, or fluctuations of prices. And the product itself is a mix of its content, its service, and the platform that serves it. So viewing how those things connect as a landscape, how you have suppliers, and the questions that it raises are actually relevant. And for that, we look to create a view on the landscape. And that's where we introduce the Wardley Maps. So just quick show of hand, who is familiar with Wardley Maps here? If you give me a thumbs up if you are. So I fly through the rest. And if you're not, I've got quite a few things. So a few of you are familiar, okay? So I'm going to fly at reasonable pace, let's say, for the others as well. So on a Wardley map, the idea is we've got a canvas and space has a meaning. It has a meaning around the visibility. So what is at the top, the kind of things the customer understands, the customer sees, the customer value is the first line of interaction. And further down below, it's what supports it. And then there's the maturity movement, which is the most important part of a map. And it's understanding that everything evolves over time, from genesis to commodity. What that means as well, everything consolidates over time. So things start becoming a bit experimental, and then as we experience it, as we progress them, they are more repeatable, they are more defined, and over time they become expected. And everything travels through that. And the key is, how do you make your value chain travel through that? And how do you make your services as well? Because part of the traveling is also going from something that may be sort of discrete and unique and really confidential in a way, or very small audiences, to something more mainstream, which has volume. So the idea is you need to try and ride that movement to actually get the volume, get the business. So what we tend to have is basically the user at the top, so the customer, ideally the paying customers, but sometimes it's a different mode, so we call them users. Then we have the user need. So what do they need? What is valuable to them? And then we got the value chains element that we lay across the canvas. So I'm going to give you some examples. And first of all, how do we need to think about the canvas? The genesis end is you invent something. There's something new, you experiment. It's ropey, it's unique sometimes. It has very, very small audience, if any. And that's the start of the journey. Then what happened is, and there's already a factor of inertia, is how do you find your clients, and you tend to make what you manage to sell. You're very driven in the custom build about what your client need. And you're going to take a lot of guidance, a lot of feedback loop from the clients, and really try and service the few clients you have first. And over time, as you repeat this, you're going to start selling what you make. So basically, you define a product. That's what a product is. And you're going to consolidate it as a product. And then you basically look for the clients to sell that to. And they don't necessarily have so much choice. They're not tailoring it to themselves. They have to actually rely on the features, and then you feature iterations on that. Now, what we have as well is, for the people that scan for signals, that don't want to experiment so much, and that have a very good agility to be a fast follower, you can enter the chain at different points. You can jump into the chain when the business is becoming already more mature, more accepted, and has more volume in the market. But of course, if you were not experimenting because you were more of a laggard, your chance of being a fast follower are very limited. But you can jump at any one point in time. And then where the play is, the big play is, how do you get for volume? How do you become a platform utility? It plays on the price, and the price starts being a lot more competitive, and being in this space. And sometimes that's where the large volume, large scales become. And of course, every stage in the process has those black dots, which are inertia of changing the organization from something it was to something it needs to become. But equally as well, when the platform and utilities are starting to establish themselves, we have new possibilities that emerge. And that's where the startup sort of ecosystem plays out, and what we tend to call new diffusion curves. So new take on a service that will challenge again the industry. And there's also inertia to go from something that is very common and established to something entirely new, a new perspective on it. And when there are big shifts like that, so let's say from the standard phone, GSM phone, to a smartphone, you see companies that struggle to adapt, and very often the incumbents gets replaced, e.g. Nokia versus iPhone. So those are the dynamics at play in a map. And if we take a cup of coffee as an example, a user wants a nice cup of coffee. A barista will do that with craft and care, and the artisan coffee they've got, and maybe their professional cafetiere that is really that special. And that relies on power and water for utilities. Now, if that user wants to have a cup of coffee conveniently at their home every morning, the convenience is going to start being more prevalent in their needs than the craft and care, which means that you have people that will service that with, let's say, the Grand Cru capsules, called that way, like wine, and the home coffee maker machines, like an espresso. And what we see then is, maybe the market with generic capsules, the standard of the capsule starts getting established, and there's a price point with many more people producing those capsules as a standard. And the barista gets themselves out of business. Through the commodification of the industry, their business becomes niche, and they have to figure out how, with this movement, they need to stay in play. Okay? So that's a crash course about maps. And what does that matter is because one size doesn't fit all, and when we have those big transformation program with agile everybody type thing, this is generally misguided. And having the clarity of your landscape, you have a clarity of, in the uncharted domain, you need to be very agile, very flexible. In the industrialized domain, you need to eke out the last bits of performance. And your value chain lays out across this, and the rules of engagement, the rules of success will be different as things progress. So mapping the disintermediation, and here we're talking about a quick service restoration example. If you know my past, you probably know what inspired this thinking. And essentially, you can imagine your McDonald's, your KFCs, your Subway, and others like that. What the customer wants is get fast food. And it's very simple business model. People go to there generally just for one thing, getting a fast fix of food. And the business was very, very simple for many years, where you would go to a local restaurant, you may have a specially accommodated drive-through. The restaurant will generally be franchisees from a main restaurant chain. And it was mostly a cash and counter type engagement. So you go to the place, there's a counter in the restaurant, there's a counter in the drive-through, you pay card or cash, and you get your food. And I don't really put in there all the cooking and elements like that. But that's a simplified business model, very much a productized business model on which franchisees also buy in, and they're also a customer of the restaurant chain. And typically you would do, in a professional sort of setup, you will look at seeing the value for franchisees, because you need the franchisees to buy into the model so that they open new restaurants. So here we're taking the perspective of the guest customer, the end customer. They want food, very simple model. And then we add in the industry the Deliveroo, Uber Eats, and so on, the platforms. And what they brought is that doorstep convenience. The second thing they brought is choice. Because they scale the number of restaurants on their platform, they bring a lot more choice. And the trick they brought in as well is the logistic. They brought the logistic of people picking up your food in a local restaurant. And it's not trivial, because they need to route a lot of orders and a lot of drivers to the relevant restaurant and to deliver to the relevant address. So they mastered that logistic. What happened then is, and in this industry is very interesting, because COVID has accelerated everything. Once we couldn't go out anymore because of the lockdown, the doorstep convenience become very, very, very quickly a big factor of business. And that industry has probably seen an acceleration of 10 years in a couple of years. So the home delivery has become a very big thing. And you would have seen in every restaurant you go in now, you tend to have a kiosk. And the new economics of restaurants revolve around digital. Now, how this has accelerated, what happened is that it became prime time for home delivery services, and the local restaurants became a utility of the delivering services. The delivering services do not cook anything. They just organize the logistic to transport what the local restaurant, becoming effectively kitchen utilities, or delivering to the customer. So in effect, they pushed the restaurant into a commodity, which is not necessarily a utility, which is not necessarily quite nice in terms of margins because you're squeezed in that space. And they intermediated the relationship. They intermediated, and by bringing those their convenience, relying on logistics. And those logistics just plugged into the value chains that existed in the main restaurant. Okay? And of course, they bring choice. Now, if we summarize that, the customer wanted a service. There was a place to get that service, to order and consume, which was based on contents and products, and which was based on business facilities, kind of the platform or the business facilities and the franchises here. And a new convenient way of engaging the customer, backed up by the relevant logistic, plugging in into the services and so on that exist, relying on digital tech, meant that they got pushed out of their own business. Okay? So the landscape is very clear here. The Wardley map helps you seeing that and seeing how disintermediation is happening and how businesses are getting pushed into commodities. I talked a lot. Quick check-in. Do you recognize this pattern? Have you got questions so far?
I've got a question.
Go
If you guys
ahead.
can hear me. Just the user needs, I'm assuming those would also drag kind of towards the right. So I'm assuming, before Uber, there's more effort and there's more fanfare with going out to a restaurant. But as the restaurants become commodities, I just expect to get food whenever I want. So that kind of becomes almost like a utility because I didn't see that moving, but that logic holds.
Yes.
Oh,
On
okay.
the map, you don't, at the top, yes, you can position that, and you're completely correct that there's an expectation, and that expectation becomes more utilized than actually something special. And you can look to represent that in a map. I haven't done that here. You're completely correct. But do imagine as well that where this sits is down to what value you put behind it. So sometimes it's a utility, but if people want to price higher, they need to make it more special. And therefore, that experience, it could be more of a custom type experience or more a productized, a theme type experience. So in this industry, let's say Nando's is probably you would associate Nando's as more of an experience than McDonald's. So there is more of a context, there is more effort around their setup that looks a little bit more upmarket. So indeed, you can position that need, and that need will drive the price sensitivity, the perception of value that the customer will have in there. That's also why, probably the likes of Wagamama, and in talking in the sense of maps, they show you that we are cooking here, custom for you. It's almost custom, right? The kitchen is exposed because it's a gauge of quality. So all those things actually, by looking, giving a perception of being more custom, you actually get the value perception higher up, and you can look at the flow of value on the map that will tell you whether you can price higher with that or not. Great question. Thank you. Any other questions?
Felipe, it's just more or less a terminology question that I kind of get confused on a little bit. It's between you mentioned like value chain and value streams in the mapping. Is there kind of a difference in that, or do you look at
That's a
both?
good question. In a way, value chain and value stream are kind of interchangeable in the language of strategy and language of mapping. We tend to talk about value chain in the mapping language, which really in the lean term means a value stream. In the language of lean, when we look at the value stream, we really look at end to end. And when we talk about the value chain, we tend to look at a sub part of the end to end.
Okay.
So it's very confusing, I appreciate, because in its context, it may mean a different thing here.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Apologies for that, but I'm kind of adopting the
That's a
language of those words, and they don't have the same terminology, unfortunately.
thank you.
Any other questions? So let's carry on with what can we do about that? And defending against disintermediation or recovering from disintermediation. And it's in a way, how do you play those digital players at their own game? And how are you going to re-intermediate that relationship with some special digital ordering, maybe a stronger identity and a stronger relationship with the brand, and maybe a stronger customer relationship management with real-time marketing, personalized offer, personalized service, VIP services, and that sort of thing. So it's a very big investment to then looking at, well, we were quite happy to be cut off from our customers, and now we want to reconnect with the customers. You have to put in quite a lot of effort to get to that. And you have to reimagine not just your product, not just the quality in that sort of business, not just the kind of burger you're going to sell, but actually what's the criticality of the service that you bring around that product. How do you make it really special to be a customer of you? So what we see when that can happen is basically the restaurant re-intermediate their relationship. So the brand re-intermediate the customer relationship with a superior experience, and they need to create the service that goes for that superior experience. And they actually push the aggregators as a utility of their business because they've got the network to have people on mopeds collecting the food from their restaurants to deliver it to people's homes. So we have an interesting game here about who intermediates at the front end and who's going to be the utility at the back end of this industry. Cat and mouse game. So, and actually another aspect and a key one in the sense of how you're going to re-intermediate your relationship, it may not make economic sense if you were doing that only for what you sell so far. Because once you have that great knowledge of your customer, you have to wonder, what else could I sell to them? How do I see my business not through what I currently sell, but through the customer, what they may be willing to purchase? And I've seen that in that industry, where if people are completely focused on the transaction of the business they do, they're not focusing on the potential of the customer they got. So they are losing on those opportunities to leverage selling something else. And making the economic sense of re-intermediating that relationship may not add up with the business and the products you sell so far. You have to see beyond that with the potential that the customers carry. So for instance, in addition to burgers, can you sell a subscription model? Can you sell merchandising? Can you sell other things? I don't know what. Games, whatever it is, but the fact that you have those customers, what can you do with them? And that often is missed. So just to generalize basically that example as a summary, we have a service, a new convenient way to engage. So that's the scene set of where we left it out as a generic thing. A new convenient way to engage customers, backed up by logistic and choice. The choice is made of end businesses that you surface and that you have commoditized. And this is all backed up by digital tech, especially customer knowledge. And for those businesses that have been commoditized, they need to actually transform to serve a new immersive and personalized experience as a response most of the time. And immersive is very key here. How can we make that relationship with the brand matter? How can it be an ongoing thing? How can we actually, by opening that relationship, lower the cost to sell because we have emails, we have an ongoing conversation with the customer. And once they do that, they can actually also take a customer view of other goods and services they may do. And the tension, we have to recognize how can that immersive experience matter so much that it trumps the choice that the aggregators give. And the tension, the strategic tension here is really to size up the immersiveness versus the choice on the other side. And of course, there's a massive inertia. Because if people let themselves go into that situation and not thinking that way, so their ability to restore the intermediation with their customer is relatively limited. They need to profoundly rethink how they see their business through their customers, not through the good they sell or the transaction they make. They need to profoundly reintegrate the aspects of technology, personalization, data into their business so they can create that immersive experience. And they need to see beyond generally what they sell in order to make the economic sense of that. It's very rare to have businesses that have let themselves into that situation being able to think that way. Toys R Us. Okay? So that's kind of it. And as a debrief, open debrief, do you recognize those risks of disintermediation in your business? And what are you doing about those? And do you appreciate, remember what I told you to think about it, we started this. Do you appreciate how tools like Wardley Maps help you visualize that landscape for better decision making? Over to you, and I'm going to check the chat quickly. The reintermediating is not quite direct, I'd say, because the delivery business control price and payment. You don't get to contract them as purely delivery, to the best of my knowledge. So yes and no. If you really got that far that you have no way of taking orders directly, yes, you're correct. You're really stuck into a corner. You painted yourself into the corner of the map. If you have developed a on delivery service, let's say, you can negotiate agreements and I've seen that for real, by the way, where basically you have your own service, but equally, and that service will use those companies as utilities to do the delivery. So you can do that. The challenge you got is how much upper hand have you got in terms of negotiation? Because if your perspective was that I've got so many more costs that way, I'm going to yank the prices up through the platform, and then I do my own delivery service. In terms of commercials, people will object. You undercutting them because you sell direct. So commercially, it's a tricky situation there. But if you don't have the upper end for negotiation, you painted yourself into the corner of the map at the end of the day. And that's probably not such a pleasant place to be. So I've got next one from Joris. The power of brand and customer experience is becoming a unique competitive advantage to build lasting, loyal relationship for businesses with their customers' communities. Why should customer care to reconnect with a business brand? And that's an interesting thing. And traditional marketing will think about the brand is what the customers are buying. But if you think about that disintermediation, are they buying the brand of the good or are they buying the brand of delivery? At some point, if you order something basic on Amazon, do you go to Amazon or you go to the product you're looking for? Suddenly, the brand of delivery takes over the brand of the good when things become very commoditized. So yes, they can still play the brand in a Procter and Gamble type sense. They can still play the brand and leave everything else. But what is their business at that point? Is it just the brand? How can a business survive just on the brand? It's difficult to say. Is it the recipes and the brand? Maybe it is. Is it the kitchens, the recipes, and the brand? And the big question is, if they are completely disintermediated, it's also possible that the same companies say, you know what? We have scale, and we're going to open a kitchen that does all those brands. We cook McDonald's, KFC's, Nando's, everything. We cook in our own kitchen, and we have economies of scale because it's one kitchen for all the brands. So suddenly you get yourself disintermediated at the front, and a part of your business that was your know-how is also getting removed because you no longer have the economies of scale to run that. Suddenly you become the recipe and the brand. That's it. Maybe some people are comfortable with that. But then you're really dependent on those platform providers to actually leave you the room to exist. E.g., Toys R Us with Amazon. Any other questions? We are pretty much on time. So many brands intermediate to Amazon for delivery when the brand is strong. The question is, how long can it stay strong for? Can Wardley Map have an additional persona to the customer to account for other factors of change like regulation, e.g. a regulator? Interesting question. The regulator is, you can show the regulator, you can show multiple users, but typically it's the regulation that plays into the value chain of the map. Now, you can represent the regulator. What's also interesting, it's sometimes the dynamic of having a B2C business and a B2B business. And in the case of a restaurant franchise, the example we've been working with, you would have a part of it that is actually the end customers, the guest, that buys a burger, and you will have part of it that is a franchisee that buys into the brand where they're going to invest money to open a restaurant. And sometimes it's worthwhile looking, to map either of them or both of them separately. And once you've done that, bringing them onto the same map to see the interrelation between what's valuable to a customer, what's valuable to a franchisee. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being with me. Just quick last announce, and just a reminder, there's 3 meetups coming up. The second one of this around absolute convenience, where we're going to recoup with some of what we said, but I'll bring some other case studies on now. And that's going to be on the 6th, I think, of February. Yes, Friday the 6th. So same slot. We have a Lean Tech Fundamental, which is more of a training. There's a small cost to that. It's 2 hours in an evening on the 10th of February. And closer to us, in a couple of weeks' time. Or actually, is it next week? No, a couple of weeks. We have Our Toyota as leadership and what services and tech can learn, very much around the role of leadership, and a great conversation, I'm sure, with Monica and Fortune to explore how we should do leadership in Agile. And I think the jury is still out on that one, and we see quite a lot of confusion. Thank you so much.